For 5,000 years, there existed schools that taught what no school taught openly. They were not schools of reading, nor of mathematics, nor of common philosophy. They were schools of transformation. They taught what Plato called the greatest matters, those that no writing can fully capture. Socrates was initiated at Eleusis. Pythagoras spent decades in Egyptian schools. Plato knew the rites. Aristotle, Alexander the Great, Cicero, Plutarch, all touched the mystery schools at some point. What they learned inside remained secret for millennia, with reason, with intention, with precision. It was not secret out of elitism. It was secret because the knowledge was too powerful to transmit without preparation. Like fire, in the hands of one who is ready, it illuminates. In the hands of one who is not, it burns uncontrolled. That was the argument of the mystery schools. And it is an argument that deserves to be taken seriously, because what these schools taught was nothing less than the technology of consciousness transformation, not spiritual metaphors, precise procedures, verifiable techniques, paths mapped in detail. The greatest mystery schools in history, Eleusis in Greece, Hermetic in Egypt, Orphic in the Mediterranean, the Vedic mysteries of India, the Mithraic mysteries of the Middle East, the shamanic traditions of Siberia, the Celtic mysteries of the Druids, the mysteries of the Maya and Aztecs, the rites of Isis in ancient Egypt, cultures without historical contact developing structurally identical initiatory systems. Why? Because they were all discovering the same thing, the nature of human consciousness and its hidden potentials, and because human nature is universal. Discoveries about it converge, regardless of culture. This episode will reveal what these schools taught, with the respect and precision the subject demands, not as esoteric entertainment, as archaeology of the deepest knowledge humanity ever produced. Because if there was something these schools knew, and the evidence says there was, we need to know it, not to reproduce ancient rituals, to recover the knowledge the rituals transmitted, and to ask, what from the initiatory tradition still applies, here, now, in the 21st century? The answer we will find is much more than imagined, almost everything that matters deeply. So let us enter. Let us pass through the portal. Let us see what lay on the other side of initiation. But first we need to understand, what was an initiation? What really happened in these rites? An initiation was not an admission ceremony. It was a carefully engineered death and rebirth. The candidate entered as one person, they left as another. Not through belief, through direct induced experience. The mysteries of Eleusis are the most documented. They were celebrated for 2,000 years without interruption. Cicero wrote, "In the mysteries of Eleusis, we learned not only to live with joy, but to die with hope." Plato said that whoever dies uninitiated goes to Hades in chaos. The initiate will live with the gods. These are not the testimonies of the credulous. These are the most intelligent men of the ancient world, reporting real transformation. What happened in the Eleusinian rites was, apparently, an experience of anticipated death. The initiate was brought to the edge of the dying experience, and then brought back, with knowledge. The knowledge that consciousness does not end with the body, not as belief, as direct experience. Research on near-death experiences shows exactly this. Radical transformation through direct experience. Survivors of near-death experiences report the same as ancient initiates. Everything changed. They lose the fear of death. They gain unconditional love. They expand compassion. They change priorities. The mystery schools engineered this deliberately, with techniques, with precision, with safety, using sensory deprivation, controlled breathing, specific music, entheogens in some cases, not recreational drugs. Technology of consciousness expansion, used with rigor, preparation, and sacred context. The kykeon of Eleusis, the sacred drink of the mysteries, very possibly contained ergotamine, a precursor of LSD. Gordon Wasson, Albert Hofmann, and Carl Ruck proposed this in 1978 in The Road to Eleusis. It is taken seriously. This would explain why 2,000 years of initiates reported the same experience with such consistency. Now, the Hermetic Mysteries of Egypt, the oldest and perhaps the deepest of all. The Egyptian priests had a curriculum of 42 sacred books, the Books of Thoth, divided into 6 categories: philosophy, natural philosophy, sacred hieroglyphics, astronomy, liturgy, and medicine, and a 7th secret category, which described what happened to consciousness after the death of the body. The Egyptian Book of the Dead is a public fragment of this teaching. What lay behind it was more precise. The king's chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza. Many scholars believe it was an initiatory chamber. The empty sarcophagus, not a tomb, a chamber for simulating death. A womb of rebirth. The dimensions of the chamber create specific acoustic resonances at 111 Hz, the frequency of altered states. This is not New Age speculation. It is measurable acoustics. John Reed measured and documented it in 1997. The initiates spent 3 days and 3 nights in the chamber, alone, in darkness, in silence, in stone. They emerged as masters, not through belief, through having directly confronted what lies beyond the persona. The Orphic Mysteries revolved around the myth of Orpheus, the descent to the underworld and the return. The catabasis, the descent, was the central metaphor. To descend to the depths of oneself in order to rise transformed. All the great descent myths share this structure. Orpheus, Persephone, Inanna, Osiris, Jesus. They are not stories of divine characters. They are maps of inner journey, instructions for transformation. The death of Osiris and his resurrection by Isis is not Egyptian cosmology. It is the psychology of the initiate. The resurrection is not theological. It is the experience of emerging from the rite completely transformed, reborn. Now, the Mythric Mysteries, the most organized initiatory system of the late ancient world. 7 degrees of initiation: raven, bridegroom, soldier, lion, Persian, messenger of the sun, father. Each degree corresponds to a planet, a metal, a specific teaching about the nature of the cosmos. This directly echoes the Hermetic teaching of the 7 planetary spheres through which the soul passes. The Mithraeum, the Mithraic temple, was underground. The descent was literal before it was symbolic. The Vedic mysteries of India had the 4 ashrams, life stages, and the Gurukula system. The deepest knowledge, the Brahma Vidya, the knowledge of Brahman, was transmitted only between guru and disciple, not from book to reader. From consciousness to consciousness, in physical presence, in living relationship. But what exactly was taught? What were the core contents of the mystery schools? First central teaching: the human being has a dual nature, one mortal and one immortal, not as religious belief, as a functional description of the experience of those who pass through initiation. The mortal part, the persona, the ego, is the conditioned self, useful, necessary, but not all that you are. The immortal part, the nous, the Atman, the neshama, is the consciousness that precedes and sustains the ego. The initiation was designed so the initiate would directly experience the immortal nature while still alive. Second teaching: the cosmos has levels. The sensory world is the densest layer of a multi-dimensional reality. Neoplatonism, the one, the nous, the world soul, nature, matter. 5 levels of reality. Each level is denser, more limited, more individuated than the previous. Matter is the most distant, and the human being, unique among all beings, has conscious access to all 5 levels. This is what makes the human special for these traditions. Not intelligence, their breadth of being. Third teaching: the mind has layers. What we call I is only the most superficial layer. Below personal consciousness lies what Jung called the collective unconscious, already mapped by the initiates. And below the collective unconscious lies something the mystery schools called the universal mind. The initiatory work was the progressive mapping of these levels, from the surface to the depths. Fourth teaching: reality responds to consciousness, not as belief, as an operational law. The initiate who understands their true nature can operate in ways the uninitiated consider impossible. Not supernatural powers, natural capacities of a consciousness that knows what it is, and therefore what it can do. Fifth teaching: love is not a feeling. It is the cohesive force of the cosmos, the fabric of being. Empedocles called it philia, the force of love that unites the elements, opposed to nekos, which separates them. Plato wrote about cosmic eros, love as the principle that moves the cosmos toward perfection. The initiates learn to align with this force, to operate from it, to make it their natural state. Sixth teaching: the most politically dangerous. Every human being has direct access to the divine, not through priests, not through temples, not through sacred texts, directly, from within. This made the mystery schools radically subversive of any religious and political structure. A person who knows they are a direct expression of the One. What need do they have for pope, king, or priest? This explains why the mystery schools were persecuted, why they were suppressed, why the secrecy. The seventh teaching: death is not the end of consciousness. It is a transition to another mode of being. This teaching was not given as belief. It was given as experience. The initiate lived death before dying, and whoever lived death before dying no longer fears dying. That was the central promise of the mysteries. Plato described this precisely. To philosophize is to learn to die. Initiation was philosophy lived. These 7 teachings were the core. The rest, the rituals, symbols, myths, were the vehicle. And the reason they needed a vehicle, why they could not be taught simply as philosophy, is that these teachings are not knowledge about something. They are changes in what you are. They require experience. You cannot intellectually know you are immortal. You need to experience the dissolution of the ego and continue. That is the most important distinction between the mystery schools and any other educational system. And it is the reason the world, with all its available information, still lacks what they offered. We have more information than any civilization in history, and less real transformation per capita. The initiatory tradition said, knowledge without direct experience does not liberate. It may even imprison more, because it creates the illusion that knowing about freedom is the same as being free. It is not. It never was. The mystery schools protected their members from that trap, through direct experience as the criterion. Gnosis, direct experiential knowledge, was the only knowledge that truly counted for them. And here we arrive at the most disturbing revelation. This knowledge did not completely disappear. It was preserved, in symbols, in architecture, in rituals that survived without their meaning being transmitted. Gothic cathedrals are libraries of the Hermetic tradition. Every architectural detail carries teaching. The sacred geometry of the rose windows, the labyrinths on the floors, the numbers in the proportions. They are texts in stone. Freemasonry preserved rituals of Hermetic Pythagorean origin, emptied of living content, but preserved. The Rosicrucians, the Order of the Temple, the Cathars, all preserving fragments of the initiatory tradition. The Jewish Kabbalah preserves the teaching of the levels of reality in the form of the tree of life. Islamic Sufism preserves the teaching of cosmic love as a fundamental force, from Rumi to Ibn Arabi. Vajrayana Buddhism preserves one of the most sophisticated technologies of consciousness transformation that exists. And Tantra, in its deepest forms, preserves the technology of using expanded states as a portal. What all these traditions have in common is the initiatory structure: preparation, dissolution, rebirth. Preparation, the work of purification, not moral, but epistemological, clearing the false beliefs that distort. Dissolution, the experience, induced, controlled, carefully guided, that the ego is not all that you are. Rebirth, the integration of what was experienced, the return to the world with a new fundamental identity. This 3-phase structure is universal. It is the archetype of human transformation in all cultures. Modern science is rediscovering this. Research with assisted psychedelics is mapping the same terrain. Clinical trials with Psilocybin at Johns Hopkins and NYU show transformations that Eleusinian rites promised. permanent reduction of fear of death, increase of compassion, change in priorities in a single session. This is science rediscovering the mysteries of Eleusis, with white lab coats instead of togas. Michael Pollan wrote about this in How to Change Your Mind. The mystery schools would say, of course. What the mystery schools had that modern laboratories do not yet have: the integral context, years of preparation, experienced guides, sacred context, mythic framework, post-experience integration. The substance without this context is an earthquake without an engineer, powerful, but without direction, without purpose. The complete context is what transforms an experience into initiation, and initiation into permanent transformation. And this is exactly what the initiatory tradition developed, and what modern science is trying to recover. How does this apply now? We live in an age without mystery schools, but the need for them is greater. Because the most fundamental problems of current civilization are not technical. They are problems of consciousness. The ecological crisis is a crisis of consciousness, of beings who do not perceive themselves as part of the living cosmos. The meaning crisis is a crisis of consciousness, of beings who do not know their deepest nature. The mystery schools solved these problems at the root, not with therapy, not with philosophy, with transformation. But the conditions for initiation exist today, not in ancient temples, in other forms. Intensive meditation produces the same states that the initiatory chambers of Egypt engineered. Deep therapeutic work produces the same dissolution of the conditioned ego that catabasis sought. Living in wild nature produces the dissolution of ego boundaries that the ancient rites sought. What the mystery schools knew, and which still applies, is that transformation demands the death of the familiar. It demands that something in you dies, not metaphorically, that the version of you who entered the process does not come out. No comfortable practice can do this. No affirmation, no spiritual podcast, no weekend retreat. The mystery schools knew that comfort and transformation are mutually exclusive, completely. That is why the initiatory process always included an element of ordeal, of encounter with what frightens, not cruelty, the necessary storm that forges steel, the cold that solidifies glass, the pressure that makes diamonds. What you encounter at the edge of your limit, that is the portal. The mystery schools knew where it was, and they had guides, the hierophants, the initiating masters, who knew the process from the inside, people who had made the journey, who knew the terrain, who could guide without projecting their own fear. Today we call these people therapists, mentors, contemplative teachers, retreat guides. The function exists. The knowledge exists. The need is greater than ever. The forms are contemporary. And the question is not whether you can have an initiation. The question is, are you ready for what it demands? Because initiation is not a pleasant experience. It is the most challenging experience that exists, and also the most valuable, the only one that produces what Cicero described, knowing not only how to live, but how to die. The secret of the mystery schools was not a set of forbidden information. It was a technology, the technology of consciousness transformation, the most powerful humanity ever developed, more powerful than any external technology because it acts at the root, in being, and not merely in effects. And the secret within the secret, what the hierophants transmitted at the most intimate moment of initiation, was the simplest recognition that exists, the one that no word can fully transmit. You are already what you seek. You always were. The seeking was the only thing preventing the recognition. That was the message of Eleusis, of Hermopolis, of the Oracle of Delphi. Know thyself, not know thyself in the psychological sense. Know what you are before any personal story, what you are before your name, before your memories, before your beliefs, before any content. That is what Socrates meant. It is what Ramana Maharshi meant. It is what Meister Eckhart meant. And it is what you can discover, not at Eleusis, not at Giza, not in a mystery school of the past, but here, now, in this breath, in this moment of attention turned upon itself. The most advanced technology of initiation does not need stone chambers or sacred substances. It needs silence, honesty, willingness for the familiar to dissolve, and an instant of attention. The mystery schools created elaborate rites because most people needed them, to aid the dissolution of the familiar, to create conditions in which recognition became inevitable. But what was recognized was always something that was there before the rite, and that is here now, in you. The secret of the mystery schools was always the same secret. You are already what you seek. You always were.